a good work or school week. We're very glad to have you join us for SpaceX's planned launch of the Starlink 8-19 mission using the Falcon 9 rocket you see sitting there at Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We have most of the usual gang with us tonight. Our Stephen Young is running the technical side of the broadcast. Our Adam Bernstein is standing by, ready to track the rocket once it lifts off the pad. Our Michael Caine has the evening off tonight, but if you'd like to follow the fellas on X, you can find their handles over on X, formerly Twitter. Adam is at ABurnNYC, Michael Caine at MD Caine Jr. While you're there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. We also will have tracking assistance from our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. As we are stepping into our live coverage this evening, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button there on YouTube. It allows more folks to find their way into this live coverage. We appreciate the little more than 1,000 of you who are with us at the start of this broadcast stream. I also want to thank our wonderful moderators in the live chat, Callistia Lee. See you in here tonight, and we'll keep our eyes peeled for any of the other mods who are able to join us over the course of this live launch coverage. If you do see them pop in, be sure to give them a very warm welcome and a big hello. We are powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Roddy Mom 12, Jeff Hansen, David Hulk, Big 816, Sulfur for Lunch, Lloyd Green, Leslie, Daniel, KH, Rocket Girl, Toby Wobe, Leslie Daniel, many others. Matt Spencer, hello to you. Bubba Ray, good evening. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and of course, the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments right here in 4K. Last but not least, if you have a comment or question about this particular mission or other happenings in the realm of space, go ahead and use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about as the broadcast progresses, but he'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now in the meantime, and we're very appreciative of that. So, want to welcome in our newest channel member, Just Martin, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Just Martin. We're glad to have you with us. I also want to thank Mel Roberts Harold for a $5 super chat. Good to see you this evening, Mel. He says, great way to wrap this week up with Spaceflight Now, watching a launch. And a thanks to Jeff Hansen, one of our pre-existing channel members as well, for a $10 super chat. Good to see you this evening, Jeff. Who says, thank you, Spaceflight Now and a mod squad for another great broadcast. As we are coming into this broadcast, of course, it seems to be the case with some of our launch operations. We are watching the weather very closely, taking a look at some of the weather data coming in. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 40% chance of favorable weather at liftoff for this mission, citing the liftoff winds. Here's a satellite overview of the Cape. Fortunately, precipitation is not going to be an issue this evening, but to bring it back out to this wide shot, if Stephen, if you could bring up the wind speed here, taking a look at our local wind speed monitor here at the press site, which gets new readings about every 5 minutes, clocking a current wind speed of about 12.4 miles per hour. and the most recent gust clocked in at 21.1 miles per hour. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that bug and the wind speeds that we are seeing here at the press site. Not exactly always the same as what they're seeing out at the pad, but of course it's a good indication of wind conditions, as both SpaceX and their meteorologists, along with the Mets over at the 45th Weather Squadron, those hardworking launch weather officers, are tracking conditions in order to ensure a safe departure today. SpaceX is counting down to a liftoff this evening at 7:31 p.m. Eastern. That is 23:31 UTC. If for whatever reason, because of either weather conditions or a technical issue that could come up with the rocket, SpaceX does have a 24-hour backup opportunity. It's coming up tomorrow, Saturday, October 19th at 7:06 p.m. Eastern. In support of the mission today, the Brevard County Emergency Operations Center has activated their launch operations support team. One of the most active EOCs in the country, since Brevard's EOC does spring into action whenever there is a launch operation. So SpaceX keeps them quite busy these days. As I mentioned in the tweet coming into today's launch opportunity, this is also the 99th orbital flight for SpaceX so far this year. Once this rocket launches, it'll make the 97th Falcon 9 launch of 2024, coupled with the 2 Falcon Heavies, and then you get to 99. So a very busy year for SpaceX. Unclear unless they really start to kick things into a much higher gear. See them make their previously stated goal of an average of 12 launches per month across the year for a total of 144 flights. Not saying it's impossible, since you never count SpaceX out of these things, but given the number of weeks where they've had to stand down from launching their Falcon vehicles and a combination of other extenuating factors that may be just a bit out of their reach as far as this year, but certainly looking to increase launch cadence year over year. In fact, Stephen, if we can go to pull up the chart of launch progress for the previous years. Here's a look at where SpaceX has been and where they will be going with the launch of this mission. You can see so far on the year, they've got 98 missions under their belt, looking for launch number 99 tonight, again, if the winds cooperate. If SpaceX decides to stand down from today's launch opportunity and pivot to that backup tomorrow, the weather does cooperate a bit more. 45th Weather Squadron forecasts a 60% chance of favorable weather for a launch tomorrow. That being said, for both launch opportunities today and tomorrow, the meteorologists forecast the booster recovery weather to have a risk level between low and moderate on a scale of low to moderate to high. Of course, that'll be something that SpaceX's launch team will also continue to monitor as we step through the count today. Currently T minus 48 minutes, 11 seconds and counting. In now just about 10 minutes, the SpaceX launch director is set to nominally take the poll, giving the go-ahead for the start of propellant load for today's mission. SpaceX takes their readiness poll electronically, so if they are in good posture to proceed with this launch, they can go ahead with that a little bit early. But nominally it comes up at the T minus 38 minute mark. So let's go ahead before we get to that point, talk about the countdown timeline and some of the events that we're looking forward to as SpaceX moves through its countdown this evening. If the go-ahead is given for propellant load, it begins at the T minus 35 minute mark with two primary events. Rocket grade kerosene, or RP1, is loaded on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T minus 30 minutes, they start flowing cryogenic helium on board the pressure vessels of the first stage. The helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same is true on the second stage, about 4 or so minutes after that. About T minus 23 minutes, loading of second stage RP1 concludes. Then at T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, the strong back chill down process begins. That's when SpaceX starts to condition the feed lines before second stage LOX load. We see that manifest as the so-called big vent right about T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. It's a good visual indication that fueling is moving along on track and on time when we see that. Second stage LOX load then begins at T minus 16 minutes. Number of minutes after that, at T minus 7 minutes, the engine chill down sequence begins. That involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps on the 9 Merlin 1D engines. That helps protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract system sequence begins. It starts with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, reclines back about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About 3 minutes before launch, the first stage LOX tank is full. Same on the second stage, about a minute or so later, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, when we hear the call for the Falcon 9 being in startup, control of the countdown is being handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. The SpaceX launch director gives their go for launch T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff, coming up at 7:31 p.m. Eastern. That is 23:31 UTC, or in other words, T minus 44 minutes, 22 seconds. To continue to track our weather data and the bug in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, Have seen our most recent gust at 23 miles per hour. So a slight uptick, but still should be within flight parameters for the Falcon 9 rocket. Taking a look at our live chat here, want to thank channel member Jeff Hansen for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Jeff. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Jeff in the live chat. We hope you enjoy your time as a channel member and decide to stick around with us. Now, T-minus 42 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. It's quite often folks ask about the path of the Falcon 9 rocket once it leaves the pad, so we'll hit it now and bring it back up when we get closer to launch as well. But let's go ahead and talk a little trajectory, shall we? Once the Falcon 9 rocket lifts off the pad there at Space Launch Complex 40, otherwise known as Slick 40, the rocket will be flying in a northeasterly trajectory along the coast of the eastern United States. So for our viewers that are in the northeast Florida area, Georgia, the Carolinas, if the night is clear, be sure to keep your eyes to the east, and you may see the ascent of the Falcon 9 once it lifts off the pad. Following stage separation, the first stage booster, in this case tail number 1076 in the SpaceX fleet, set to touch down on the SpaceX drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. Sitting there, waiting patiently in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. If this landing is successful, this will mark the 94th booster landing for Just Read the Instructions. Also the 279th overall drone ship landing and the 355th Falcon booster landing to date. Of course, reusing the booster isn't the only piece that SpaceX cares about as far as reusability with this mission. It also endeavors to recover the payload fairings. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort. They splash down in the ocean waters under the support of parachutes, as you can see in this picture from a SpaceX presentation earlier this year. They're brought aboard a recovery vessel after they're scooped up out of the ocean waters. SpaceX is working to push both its boosters and its payload fairings for reuse for up to 40 flights. And while SpaceX doesn't often provide updates on the number of flights that its payload fairings have flown, the currently the booster launch record belongs to a pair of now no longer used boosters, those being B-1061 and B-1062. The former was intentionally expended. The latter was destroyed during a landing failure during its final launch on August 28th. They each reached 23 missions before they met their respective demises. The current flight leader of boosters that are still in operation, that distinction belongs to B-1067, which currently has 22 missions to its name, most recently having launched back on September 17th of this year. We're now T-minus 39 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. A little less than a minute and a half away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director will need to make the call on the start of prop load tonight if SpaceX feels like they are in a good position to do so. Again, if SpaceX does feel like they are not in the best position to launch tonight, they do have the ability to launch tomorrow evening at 7:06 p.m. Eastern, 23:06 UTC. Now currently T minus 36 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. If SpaceX has given the go for the start of prop load, that's set to begin in a minute and a half, T minus 35 minutes. If SpaceX does give the call to start loading RP1 and locks on board the booster, what we're looking for as far as signs of fueling, which should become evident at around T minus 33 minutes or 32 minutes. If you look near the base of the Falcon 9 first stage booster, just above the tree line, you can see there's a branch that's kind of dancing in front of the base of the booster. Just above that, there's a slightly lighter tinted uh, band that is running perpendicular to the launch tower, the crew access tower. Right about that point is where we usually start to see some vapor, a little bit of a frost line form as the super cold densified liquid oxygen starts flowing on board Falcon 9's first stage LOX tank. Now T minus 34 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. If SpaceX is fueling tonight, fueling will have begun now. Standing by for word from SpaceX or visual evidence of propellant load. T minus 31 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. A little hard to see with the camera shake, but you can definitely see some vapor there near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. So while we have not gotten a word from SpaceX, we do see visual signs that fueling is in fact happening now on the Falcon 9 rocket. So with that, SpaceX is at least going to make an attempt to launch tonight. We'll see if weather may get the better of them, but as far as the elements that they can control, which is of course making the call and fueling the rocket, they did give the go ahead for that. And super cold liquid oxygen is flowing up board the Falcon 9's first stage, and RP1, or rocket grade kerosene, is loading on board the Falcon 9's second stage. Now T minus 29 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. At this point in the countdown, SpaceX has also begun loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels on the Falcon 9's first stage. Helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. They'll do the same on the second stage, coming up at about T minus 26 minutes. Certainly appreciate the now more than 3,800 of you who are watching our live launch coverage of the Starlink 8-19 mission tonight. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Certainly appreciate that. Also want to welcome in Astro Jen, another one of our wonderful moderators. Good to see you, Astro Jen. And if you'd like to help make our moderators' lives that much easier, we ask a couple of different things. Number one, don't be rude to each other. Number two, please refrain from posting in all caps. And number three, try to keep things focused on space coverage here. So even though there's a lot to talk about when it comes to politics, we are endeavoring to keep things as apolitical as possible here on Spaceflight Now. So go ahead to other political YouTubers to air your thoughts on the presidential election or other happenings in the political realm in those venues. This is not the forum for that. But it is a very quick way to get your message deleted if you do go down that rabbit hole. So again, as a courtesy to our mods, if you could refrain from those three things or follow those three guidelines, it'll make everyone's lives much easier and help keep things much calmer in the live chat. Let everyone have a good time. One last bit of housekeeping. Also, just remember that every launch could be someone's first. So if someone asks a question that may seem obvious to you, but is clearly not to them, be sure to show them the same grace as you would want to be extended to you for the first time that you caught a launch. as we were keeping an eye on the winds, monitoring the countdown to the Falcon 9 rocket. We did clock a gust of 20.5 miles per hour. Wind speed currently about 12.4 miles per hour. As you can see the graph in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, the trend is going down as far as overall impact of the winds, which is certainly a good thing. This weather data coming in from our localized weather station based here at the press site. So not an exact one-to-one from here to the pad, but a fairly decent representation, I would say, of the overall conditions here at the Cape. Now T-minus 24 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Let's talk a little bit about the payload that SpaceX is launching today. On board this particular Falcon 9 rocket are 20 Starlink satellites. Among those, 13 feature the direct-to-cell capabilities. Of course, there's been a bit of news on that front in response to the hurricanes, both Helene and Milton. SpaceX and T-Mobile were granted special access from the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission here in the United States, to offer essentially an early preview version of the direct-to-cell capability to those areas impacted by the storm, to help allow those phones that have the capability to receive them. I believe that for an iPhone is iOS 18, starting at that point. If cell service is down from just cell towers in the general area, you would see at the top right-hand corner of, if you're using an iPhone, instead of like LTE or 5G, you would see T-Mobile plus Starlink, or T-Mobile plus SpaceX, one of the two. And that would allow for continuous access to both texts and, I believe, calls and some very, very limited data. But again, a brief example doled out this year in response to the hurricanes of the broader capabilities that SpaceX is hoping to enable on a much broader scale as these direct-to-cell Starlinks continue to be deployed into their constellation. So far, up to this point, SpaceX has added a total of 246 direct-to-cell Starlinks to their overall constellation. With this launch, they'll notch that up to 259. This mission set to be SpaceX's 67th Starlink flight in 2024. Each of them clocks in about 1,760 pounds, or about 800 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers. They're built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and they'll be deployed at about 174 miles or 279 kilometers altitude at a 53.16 degree inclination. A little bit different, of course, these V2 minis from their version 1.5 predecessors. They feature 4 times the capacity. They introduced E-band for backhaul. They used an upgraded phased array antennas. Comparatively, they're about 2.6 times heavier. And as I just mentioned, they use argon Hall thrusters for those maneuvers, as opposed to the previously used Krypton Hall thrusters. Thanks to folks at Black Sky and HEO, here's an image that they captured of a Starlink V2 mini satellite on orbit, where you can see those solar panels extended from the main body of the spacecraft. We're now currently T minus 21 minutes, 1 second and counting. SpaceX is preparing for the so-called big vent. The chill down of the feed lines should be starting now, but we will see that visualized with the so-called big vent coming up in just about 20 seconds. This process, once the venting begins, will last until about T minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds when SpaceX pivots over to begin loading liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's second stage. And there you see the start of the big vent, right on cue. This view of the Falcon 9 rocket we're seeing here, courtesy of our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. Our friend P. Carson with Max Q Productions has the evening off tonight. Taking a wide view from across the water here, a beautiful, albeit somewhat cloudy, sunset here at the Kennedy Space Center, looking back out over at Space Launch Complex 40, Slick 40, and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. SpaceX still tracking towards a liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Coming up now, 17 minutes, 50 seconds away. Liftoff set for 7:31 p.m. Eastern, 23:31 UTC. The rocket will be launching and flying in a northeasterly trajectory, cruising along the coast of the eastern seaboard. So if it's not too cloudy in northeast Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, you may be able to catch a glimpse of the Falcon 9 as it begins its climb uphill. Continuing to track our wind gauge here, looking at sustained winds of 15.5 miles per hour now, the most recent gust reaching up to 23 miles per hour. So the winds have been calming down over the majority of the count, ticking up just slightly here. Again, we get an update from our weather system about every 5 or so minutes, so we should get a couple more of these, at least maybe a few more before liftoff. Now T minus 13 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. As SpaceX continues to progress through the countdown tonight, let's go ahead and talk about the booster that's going to be launching this mission. Talking 1076 in the SpaceX fleet, going for its 17th launch tonight. First mission came back on November 26th of 2022 when it lifted off from Historic Launch Complex 39A on the Commercial Resupply Services 26 or CRS-26 mission. That flight sending up a host of space science and supplies to the International Space Station. In fact, we're gearing up for CRS-31 here in the not too distant future. However, that will be reliant on whenever the weather is good enough for first the Crew Dragon Endeavor supporting the Crew 8 mission. Allows them to undock and splash down off the coast of Florida. After that, the Crew Dragon Freedom will undock from the forward port on the Harmony module, make a quick jaunt up to the Zenith port, and that will free up the forward port to allow the Cargo Dragon spacecraft on the CRS-31 flight to dock there and remain for about a month. All predicated on whenever the Crew Dragon for Crew 8 can leave, though. Coming back to the booster history, the next time 1076 flew was the second batch of satellites that were flown for OneWeb Flight 16 by their count. Part of their on-orbit internet constellation as well. It then launched the Starlink 6-1 mission on February 27th of 2023. That was followed up by a combo mission. The principal satellite was Intelsat 40E. It also had the hosted payload called Tempo from NASA. monitoring emissions in the United States. A series of Starlinks were coming up after that. Starlink 6-3 on May 19th, 6-6 on July 24th, 6-14 on September 9th, and 6-21 on October 5th. Moving on over to flight number 9, a pair of the O3B mPOWER satellites were up to bat, numbers 5 and 6 on November 12th. That was followed up by the AVIANOM 3 communication satellite on January 3rd of this year. Another batch of Starlinks on the Starlink 6-40 mission on February 29th, the leap day. That was followed up by the Eutelsat 36D mission on March 30th. A couple more Starlinks here. Starlink 6-54 on April 28th and 6-64 on June 1st. Final 2 missions for this booster so far were Turksat 6A on July 8th and the Worldview Legion second pair of satellites, numbers 3 and 4, lifting off on a small typo there. That should actually be August 15th on that flight. As we're getting our latest update on the winds, they continue to tick up here as we're getting closer to liftoff. Current sustained winds at 16.2 miles per hour. The latest gust now at 26.1 miles per hour. So the wind speed heading in not the direction you would hope to see is picking up closer to liftoff. Again, the 45th Weather Squadron had forecast just a 40% chance of favorable weather at liftoff, and it was forecasting just about what we're seeing right now, which was liftoff winds up between 19 and 26 miles per hour. We will continue to keep our eyes on the wind speeds as we track towards liftoff. But you may notice that's why our cameras are bouncing around a bit. It's just because it is a bit of a blustery night. As the countdown ticks on, though, I want to thank the more than 13,000 of you who are watching with us live. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button if you would be so kind to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. I'd certainly appreciate that. A good question by Ken Rowland asking, what is the launch window tonight? For those who've been around for a Starlink launch or two, you may recall that typically Starlinks will have a roughly 4-hour launch window from tip to tail. However, SpaceX basically going right to the tail on this one. 7:31 is their final launch opportunity for this window today. So essentially, they're treating this almost like an instantaneous launch here as far as when they started with their first announced launch opportunity for this mission. Again, if SpaceX is not in a position to launch tonight because of either the winds or if there's a technical issue that comes up with the rocket, they do have a backup opportunity tomorrow. It's coming up at 7:06 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, October 19th. Again, that's only if launch is not able to happen today. Now, T-minus 6 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX is about 30 seconds into the process of chilling the 9 Merlin 1D engines, preparation for planned liftoff. Blow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps to help protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. As we're coming into the final several minutes before the planned liftoff, I want to thank a few more folks for your support tonight. Our thanks to Crystal C for a $1 super chat. Really appreciate that. And a thanks to Daniel H. for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership, and to Tobe Wobe for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Thanks to the both of you, and to our newest 6 channel members. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Daniel and Tobe in the live chat. We hope you stick around with channel membership. Now 5.5 minutes to the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. We are just about a minute away from the point at which the strong back retract sequence set to begin. That process will start with the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, then the transporter erector. The strong back will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb with the Falcon 9.
Now pressing for strong back retract.
Now getting some pad views of the Falcon 9 rocket courtesy of SpaceX. As a quick bit of housekeeping here, want to note that the countdown clock you see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen is a little bit different from what's in the center there. That's because our countdown clock is in real time and SpaceX is coming in on a slight delay. As you just heard, that strong back retract set to begin now. You should be seeing some views from either the, usually from the launch tower there, the crew access tower, showing the clamp arms opening up, or just adjacent to that. This camera is from one of the lightning towers, the lightning protection system. Now T-minus 3 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. We're coming upon the end of first stage LOX load. Should hear that call up from SpaceX in just a few seconds here.
Stage 1 RP1 loads complete. Stage 1 LOX loads complete.
Good call from SpaceX. Taking one last look at the wind speeds that we can see here. 16.2 miles per hour, sustained 24.9 mile per hour gust. So it continues to be quite blustery here. We'll see if that proves to be too much for SpaceX, but so far they are continuing on with the countdown tonight. Now a little more than 2 minutes to go before the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Should be hearing the call for stage 2 LOX load being complete in a few seconds.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
Good call from SpaceX. Now the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. The venting that you're seeing there in the box and now in full screen, those are the ground gas closeouts. Should be hearing a call for that momentarily.
Ground gas closeouts.
Good call from SpaceX as we're approaching the final minute of the count. We'll come back to the live chat on the other side of the planned liftoff, but for now, let's keep our focus here on the Falcon 9 rocket. One minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
With that call, the next call we should be hearing is that the SpaceX launch director is granting their go for launch.
Go for launch.
Good final call from SpaceX now, less than 30 seconds before the planned liftoff now of the Falcon 9 rocket. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 8-19 mission. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower.
Vehicle supersonic.
Now a little more than a minute into flight, some good calls from SpaceX as the Falcon 9 rocket continues to climb in the skies above Florida.
Max Q.
The rocket now passing through the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. That call, Max Q. Coming upon a few different events in fairly rapid succession here. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, about T plus 2 minutes 24 seconds. That'll be followed a few seconds later by stage separation. Then the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage will ignite. That'll be followed by the bearing deployment just before the 3-minute mark. That call you just heard is the call for the thermal conditioning of that Merlin vacuum engine prior to its ignition. Good tracking views this evening as the Falcon 9 rocket continues its climb uphill, again flying in a northeasterly trajectory, heading along the coast of the United States. Approaching MECO in a few seconds. There you see MECO. Stage separation.
MECO.
Stage
And SES-1.
confirmed.
And back ignition.
And a nice view of the setting sun. Good callouts from SpaceX. Good onboard camera views here. And the dot you see in the big box, the faint glint of that Merlin vacuum engine. Hypersonic grid fins now deploying on the Falcon 9's first stage.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And a good deployment of those payload fairings and the 20 Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. 13 of those feature the direct-to-cell capability. Now about 3.5 minutes into flight in real time. Coming up on our next event in about 2.5 minutes is when the first stage entry burn begins. That burn will last about 24 seconds in total. Those puffs you're seeing in between the grid fins in the box on the left-hand side of your screen, Those are the cold gas thrusters that help to adjust the attitude or the position of the Falcon booster as it orients itself ahead of the aforementioned landing burn, or excuse me, the entry burn. Now approaching 5 minutes into flight. So far, a nominal mission for this Falcon 9 rocket, carrying its 20 Starlink payload. Less than a minute away to the start of the first stage entry burn. Falcon 9 first stage booster, tail number 1076, is aiming for a touchdown on the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. If successful, this will be its 17th landing after lifting off for a 17th time successfully.
Stage 1 FDS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good calls from SpaceX as the entry burn now underway. This burn lasting about 24 seconds in total.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And a good conclusion of that entry burn, you can see by looking at the speedometer at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Booster has been slowing down and is setting up for the landing burn coming up here at T plus 7 minutes and 55 seconds or thereabouts. So we're less than a minute away from that event. Vehicle now well below 20 kilometers in altitude and falling.
Stage 1 transonic.
Falcon 9 now traveling below the speed of sound. That call you just heard appears to be a good burn on the upper stage engine as well so far. Coming up on the start of the landing burn here momentarily.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn. Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
And for a 17th time, booster B-1076 is down on the drone ship.
And back shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And some good calls from SpaceX as you heard them begin to shut down that Merlin vacuum engine and call for nominal orbit insertion. At this point, the Falcon 9 upper stage will continue on in a coast phase until T plus 54 minutes and 48 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn to help circularize the orbit. And then the Starlink satellites will be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, 42 seconds. Before we go ahead and hit our mission stats, now that we've got a successful liftoff and landing of that first stage booster, I want to thank a couple of folks here in the live chat real quick. First off, I want to welcome Goku for joining us with channel membership at the Pad Leader level. Always good to have a say in on our team, and we're glad to have you with us. I want to thank Waco Jones for gifting a $10 super chat saying go for launch, obviously before liftoff happened. Also want to thank John Mound for a $5 super chat. Thank you, John. Michael Thomas as well, who says let's fly. And finally, the Russian Floof Cat, one of our wonderful channel members, $2 super chat saying make it so, Mr. Data. And with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our mission stats as they currently stand. This was the 17th flight for Falcon 9 booster 1076. This also marked the 382nd Falcon 9 launch to date. 97th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. This was the 327th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 102nd launch of 2024, including 2 Falcon Heavy launches, as well as the 3 Starship flights so far this year. This was SpaceX's 121st orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 210th orbital launch from Pad 40, and the 265th overall orbital launch from this particular pad. Taking a look at the bar chart here, you can see orbital launches were sitting at 99 for the year, looking to notch 100 in the days to come. Moving on to some recovery stats, this was the 94th booster landing on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Marking the 279th SpaceX drone ship landing and the 355th overall SpaceX booster landing. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 71st orbital launch from Florida. I want to pause here for just a moment to note that last year, between Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, there were a total of 72 launches from the Sunshine State, so we are very close to tying that record here in Florida. This launch also marks the 106th orbital launch from U.S. soil. This was the 116th launch from U.S. rocket company and the 189th orbital launch around the globe. There have been 6 orbital failures so far, so here's where our pie chart currently stands. The U.S. representing about 61% of it, China with a solid quarter, Russia's 11 launches represent 6% of the pie, Japan with their 5, India and Iran have 3 apiece, the European Space Agency has 2, but they are working towards launch number 3 with the return of the Vega C rocket, getting ready to fly in the months to come here. North Korea with 1 orbital launch attempt and failure earlier this year as well. I want to thank Dave Krupel with a $5 super chat. Appreciate you, Dave. Who asks if they still land boosters back in the launch pads. I've seen maybe 12 launches now, and none of them have ever had a return to pad, always the drone ships. Yes, they certainly do still do call it an RTLS, or return to landing site operations. It depends on how much power they need from the Falcon 9 rocket and where it's going. That'll help determine if they do an RTLS landing operation. So for missions heading up to the International Space Station, either with the Crew or Cargo Dragon varieties, they will now all use nominally a return to landing site flight pattern. And there are certainly other commercial and government payloads that can use an RTLS option as well. So no worries there. There'll be plenty more where those came from. And of course, Starship rocket has now also proved that it can do an RTLS operation too, with SpaceX successfully catching the Super Heavy booster. That historic feat happening for the first time with Starship Flight 5. The next couple of launches that we're looking at for SpaceX involve the OneWeb 20 mission set to lift off this weekend from Vandenberg Space Force Base. And then back here at Cape Canaveral, there will be the Starlink 6-61 mission, going back to the 6th shell. It's been a minute. That Falcon 9 set to fly from, again, Slick 40 on Monday, October 21st. We're also keeping our eyes down in New Zealand for the next Electron rocket launch from Rocket Lab. Bit of a cryptic mission, as Rocket Lab has not disclosed either the customer or the payload on this mission, but the mission name changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes, was set to lift off on the 19th. However, Rocket Lab announced a delay by some number of days in order to, quote, perform final checkouts, unquote. So we'll look for the next launch date announcement from Rocket Lab. And we'll, of course, update our schedule on our website, spacelightnow.com, and just click on the launch schedule tab to see the very latest. Got a few more people throwing in some support as we're closing things out, which we're very appreciative of. Renee Lynn Weldon's been a member for 3 months, saying, yippee, 3 months in. Appreciate you being with us, Renee. Another wonderful channel member, Patty Chichil, has been with us now for some time with a $2 super chat here tonight, saying thank you, Spaceflight Now and mods. Love this. And finally for tonight, we have LA32 with a 20 Mexican dollar super chat saying, hello from Mexico. I enjoy this channel. We're glad to have you with us. Hope all's well down in your neck of the woods. Always great to hear from our neighbors to the south, as we hear from our neighbors to the north quite a bit. A number of Canadians join us for launch coverage, so glad to hear other parts of North America also represented in our coverage. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. Want to thank our, of course, wonderful channel member community writ large here on YouTube. Certainly can't do these streams without the support of our channel member community. Hitting at the buzzer, want to thank Vol Fat Lighter Holler, the $10 super chat. Thank you, Vol. Also want to thank our wonderful moderators, Callistia Lee and Astro Jen, for helping out tonight. Big thanks to Chuck and Jen Briggs for supporting with tracking views this evening over at C&J Images. Tip of the hat always to our own photographer, Adam Bernstein. Working hard, standing tall against the winds out here at the Cape. Stephen Young running the technical operations of the broadcast, and most of all, thanks to you for wherever you're watching from around the world. I hope you had a wonderful time this evening, and we hope to see you right back in front of your phone or laptop or computer desktop again the next time we have a launch roll around our way. And you can be sure not to miss that by clicking the subscribe button, ringing the bell if you haven't already. That way you'll turn notifications on and be alerted whenever we post new videos or start new live streams. And with that, we are going to wrap things up for tonight. So once again, thank you all for being with us here, sticking right to the very end. My name is Will Robinson Smith. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, we want to thank you for your time and attention. And remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.